Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Smarter Giving Virtual Workshop. Before we begin, just a few tips to help you participate in today's event. You have joined the webcast muted. Should you have any technical issues during the webcast, please use the questions icon. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions, which you may submit at any time throughout the event. If you have questions, please drop them in the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen. We will do our best to cover them during the session. If we don't get to your specific question today, someone will follow up with you directly after the event. Lastly, a survey will launch after this webinar. Please take a few moments to provide your feedback to us so we can improve future event experiences. Now I will hand it over to Maeve McKeough to get us started.
Great, thank you so much. And thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us for today's session. My name is Maeve McKeough and I head up our philanthropic consulting practice. I'm joined by my colleagues Jen Bayes and Elizabeth Harnish, and we provide personalized support to individuals and institutions, helping them achieve greater impact through their philanthropy. And through Fidelity Charitable's philanthropic consulting program, we work one-on-one with donors on a variety of projects. Really anything from engaging the next generation in giving to administering grant-making programs. So we're really excited to be here with you today, and we'll share more about the philanthropic consulting program at the end of this webinar. So we're really excited about this topic, and I personally am excited because I truly believe that giving back can be one of life's most rewarding experiences. And by equipping yourself with the right tools and resources, you can be even more effective in addressing those causes that you care about most. So what we'll do today is work together to document and understand the motivations behind your giving, those causes you care about most, and develop an actionable plan that you can use moving forward. So before we dive into the content, just want to kind of lay the groundwork and context for today's conversation. So, you know, it's been a rough couple of years. We have struggled through the pandemic, which has resulted in many lives lost, many livelihoods impacted. Our nation experienced a reckoning around racial justice. We are witnessing distressing humanitarian crises and experiencing natural disasters. And all of this can feel very daunting and overwhelming, and it's very easy to feel helpless in this climate. But one of the ways that you can really be a part of the solution and be part of a positive change is through giving back. And so that's why today we want to talk about how you can be intentional and effective with your philanthropy. So we'll move on to the next slide. Today's conversation is really going to be workshop style. It's going to be highly interactive. So we want to hear from you. We'll have many opportunities for you to share your feedback and insights with us. And what we'll do today is really discuss the fundamentals of philanthropy. So why do you give? How do you give? What are the elements of a giving plan? And how can you identify nonprofit organizations that are doing great work in those areas where you care about? So with that, I will kick it over to my colleague Jen to get us started.
Thanks so much, Maeve. And if we could go on to the next slide, please, that would be great. Welcome, everyone. It's so great for you to be joining us today. We really appreciate it. As Maeve said, our session today is intended to be very interactive. So before we jump in, we did just want to check in a little bit, level set, and share some tips and best practices for maximizing our time together today. So the first thing would be really helpful if you have available to you some way to take notes. That might be a good old-fashioned pen and paper, it might be your iPad, whatever works for you. But a lot of the exercises we'll be doing today build on each other, so you'll want to look back at some of the things you had done previously, and it's easiest if you have taken some notes. We'd also like to familiarize you with the question and answer function that was mentioned at the beginning. On the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see a little bubble and it has a question mark in it. If you click on that, you can submit questions to us. Those will just be seen by us. But as we go through the session, we'd also like you to share some of your responses to the exercises with us, and then our team will share those responses back out to the group. This allows us all to kind of see what everyone's thinking and to learn from each other. I should also say that when your answers are shared back out to the group, your name is not attached to them. They are anonymous, so you don't need to worry about that. But it's nice when we're able to learn from each other as we go. We'd also like to ask you to be present. The session will take maybe 45, 55 minutes. I know there are a lot of distractions in the world, but one of my favorite quotes is, "The quality of your presence determines the quality of your experience." I firmly believe that, even we're in a virtual setting, so hopefully you can find some time and some energy to focus on what we're doing here today. As Maeve also mentioned, we really hope that you do participate. The whole point of this, again, is to learn from and with each other, and your engagement makes it that much more exciting. And lastly, as we also said, giving should bring you satisfaction and joy, and maybe a little fun along the way as well. So we hope that you have fun here today. So we're going to kind of practice using the different functions. I'd like for everyone, if you agree that these are the best, kind of plan for our time together today, to go to that question and answer box and enter an answer in the affirmative. It might be yes, okay, heck yeah, whatever works for you. And then our team will share them back out so you can just kind of see what that looks like. All right, so we're seeing we have an agreeable group today. I love it. Thank you so much for that. And then next we're going to go on and try out our first poll. So if we can go to the next slide. As we go through the presentation today, we'll probably, in every case, share with you a slide with the polling question, and we'll kind of go through the answers, and then you'll have the opportunity to answer. So our first question for you today is, why are you joining this session? Are you looking for insights, best practices? Maybe you want to refresh your strategy, get some new thoughts around your philanthropy, or maybe the current events that Maeve had mentioned at the beginning are really weighing on you, and you really want to think about different ways to make an impact, or it might be something else altogether. So let's go ahead and launch the poll. When we do this throughout today's session, we'll give you about 30 seconds to answer. Go ahead and choose your answer here, and then in a little bit we will share out the aggregated responses to the group. All right, answers are coming in. Okay, if you haven't provided an answer yet, please go ahead and do so. And now let's go ahead and close the poll and share the results. Okay, great. So most of you, it looks like, are looking for insights and best practices. And then some of you also are interested in some new thinking and really thinking about new ways to make an impact. So I hope we will deliver all of those to you today. And if we could go ahead and close that poll out. Before we jump in, we also want you to sort of ground our thinking in the many ways that you are able to give. I think often when we think about philanthropy or charitable giving, we just think about the dollars that we have. But there are so many resources that you likely have at your disposal that you can bring to bear on philanthropy. And we don't want you to forget any of those. So in addition to your money, you probably have some time that you can contribute in volunteering. Your skills, those skills you've kind of learned through your work and your life. You might be a great nonprofit board member and can use those skills there. You likely have a strong network, so other people that you know who you could connect with nonprofits. And even your influence, your voice. You can use your voice to advocate for organizations and causes that you care about. The other thing I'll note is as you go through your life, the balance of what's available to you might change a bit. You might be at a point in your life where you've got more time than money to donate, or maybe the other way around. Maybe you have more money than time. But regardless, always remember that there are a lot of different ways that you can contribute to the things that you care about, and keep them in mind as we go through our work here today. So without further ado, we'd like to get started talking about the ways that you can start to create a giving plan. So I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth to get us started on that.
Great, thanks so much, Jen, and hello to everyone. Like Jen said, it's time to get to work now. In developing that giving plan, you kind of think about it like baking a cake. First thing we're going to do is gather all of our ingredients. And to gather those ingredients, we need to know what they are. So first thing we're going to do is look at your mission, why you're giving. We'll look at budget, how much you might plan to give, how you'll select the nonprofits that you're looking to support, and then a little bit about metrics and how you'll look at success, because at the end, the cake has to taste good too. Go on to the next slide. So looking at that mission statement first, why are you giving? We need to ask ourselves a few questions with this. What are the issues and causes that are really important to us? What are our values? Where are we going to focus that giving? It's really easy to lose focus when there's so many different causes out there that you want to help with, and crafting this mission statement will help align your values and make sure you keep that focus. Next slide. So what is a mission statement, and what does it look like? How do you create this? We want to start with a few guidelines to help you do this. Basically, this is going to help you, again, accomplish what you're giving and why. They're typically going to be very short, just a few sentences. They are going to be living documents, so you should revisit them over time, just as your goals and motivations continue to change through life. It should describe that core vision and what's guiding your giving, and include information about the causes and organizations you're looking to support. And we'll also include some methodology for selecting those recipient organizations and measuring success. Next slide. So we talked about how your mission should align with your values, so I hope you're ready for a little fun activity. We listed here 50 plus values, but even this list is not exhaustive. We'd love it if you could take a look at these different values, maybe think of your own, and think about what actually guides your decision making day to day. If you feel comfortable, would love it if you could share these with us in that Q&A function. And we really want you to narrow it down to 2, maybe 3 of these at most. And also, as you're doing that, go ahead and jot those down on that pen and paper that Jen mentioned earlier on. Already seeing some come through. So we have faith, harmony. I feel like more are coming. There we go. Opportunity, growth, respect. That's a good one. Service, tolerance. Another for faith. Perfect. So yes, please continue to share those. And as I mentioned, it would be great if you could write those down and keep them close to you for the rest of this exercise, but we'll go ahead and move on. Perfect. So just like if you're doing your financial planning, it's important to consider your approach to your giving. Are you someone who maybe has a higher risk tolerance, or maybe you're a little more risk averse? In giving, this might look like, if you're lower tolerance, you might be giving to organizations that have been around for decades and have proven track records you can see. Or if you have that higher risk tolerance, maybe you're comfortable supporting organizations that are brand new, just starting, or maybe starting a new initiative that they haven't done before, that might have some bumps they have to work out along the way. Think about if you'd like to give independently, maybe even anonymously, or maybe if you'd be more comfortable collaborating with others and joining forces with other like-minded donors, like in a giving circle. And also think about how you might want to interact or engage with these organizations. It could be providing financial support alone, but you might also consider being more involved with volunteer work or potentially serving on a board. If you feel strongly about any of those, it'd be great to see some of those in the chat as well. But also just want to share that we've worked with a lot of donors in the past who have let us know that certain things are important to them, and it can change just like other things over time. We've worked with some that say that anonymity is one of the most important things they consider with their giving. They really want to make sure they maintain that anonymity. But as they continue to give and work with organizations and try to cultivate those relationships, sometimes that might change to just remaining anonymous to the public, like maybe not receiving any public recognition for their giving, but still maintaining personal connections within a nonprofit so that they can really grow those relationships, and it generally will provide more confidence as you continue to provide support year over year. Oh, good. And I see that some people are adding in there things like giving independently. Some are more hands-on. That's great. Perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this back over to Jen for that next component in building your mission statement.
Great. Thank you. If we can go on to the next slide, that would be great. So now we've kind of talked about high level, your motivation, the approaches that you that are most drawn to. But what we'd like you to think about now is we're sort of narrowing in on the actual issues that you care most about. So again, not an exhaustive list here on the screen, but we'd like you to identify 1, 2, maybe 3 issue areas where your interests are strongest, where you'd like to have the greatest impact. And again, please put these in the Q&A box. Let's share that out with the group. Write them in your notes so you've got them to look back on. Children and religion coming out. Let's see what else we got. Democracy and voting, an important one right now. Disaster relief, goodness knows these days, we've got lots of disasters. Environment, education, poverty, arts. Great, disaster relief again. So, a lot of these resonate. And again, if your area of passion is not on this list, please feel free to add it. Keep thinking on that. We'll go on to the next slide. Next, we'd like you to think about what geography and what population you'd like to serve. So the where and the who. It could be locally. You might want to do work just in your backyard, in your neighborhood, in your community, in your state. Or you might have a more global approach. There might be issues around the world that you want to affect. And likewise with populations, again, not an exhaustive list, but perhaps on the slide before you said education is really important to you, but you want to focus on early childhood education. Or maybe it's the other way around and you want to focus on adult literacy, so you'd want to focus on that. So let's share those out as well. And make note of them. And one other thing to think about, sometimes we work with donors who have some trouble thinking about, the geography and they don't want to be too limiting. We've worked with donors who have said, I want to do 75 of my support to local causes and 25% to global. So that's just something to keep in mind as we work through this together. Okay, so mostly international. We've got some national. Children, animals as populations, great. So make sure you've also made note of those. And we can go on to the next slide, please. Okay, so now it's time to start putting all of this together. But before we do that, I want to reflect back on one thing that Elizabeth said about a mission statement sort of evolving over time and changing. Because as we know, certainly your circumstances change, the world changes, and the issues that we're dealing with also change. And along those same lines, we don't want you to feel overly constricted by a mission statement. We want you to have a focus and a path and a direction, but we don't want it to feel like you can't respond to other things that you might not have planned for. So an analogy that I was sharing with the group earlier is that I kind of think of it like a GPS. When you put your destination into the GPS, you know where you're going, and the only way to know if you've got there is you get there is if you know where you're going first. So keep that in mind. But you see your path, right? Now that doesn't mean you can't stop to see the sights along the way or maybe pull off and get gas. But eventually you come back to your path so you can get to your destination. And that's how I want us to think of our mission statement. This is going to focus you. This is where you're going to do the most. Your primary giving is going to be according to this. But that doesn't mean you can't leave some room for discretionary giving. Say your friend is running in a race and wants your support, or there's a humanitarian crisis that you had no idea was going to happen and you want to support that. We want there to be room for all of this in the plan that you create. So with that said, let's start drafting our mission statement. We've got what we call our mission statement Mad Lib here. And if you look on the right side of your screen, we've also provided a worksheet to you. You'll see a little page icon. It looks like a page with writing on it. You can click on that, download a worksheet that's got this mission statement. You can type directly into the worksheet, or you can print it and write on it. You can save it for later and just do this in your notes right now if you like. But what we'd like for you to do is reflect back on the answers that you've already kind of provided. And think about, start filling in this worksheet here. So my giving is motivated by, and here's where you would include your values and approach. And if we could just click that in so we can see an example. So in this case, it might be tradition and faith and is quiet and behind the scenes. It is focused on, and this is where you put your issue areas. So perhaps it's education, arts, and after-school programs, and targeted for, and this is your target population and geography. So youth in my community, so that, and the so that is the part that might take you a little extra time, because this is where you're going to articulate your vision, your desired outcome. This is the address that your GPS is going to. What do you want to accomplish with your giving? What impact do you want to have? So in this example, we're doing all this so that all children in my community have access to enrichment opportunities that can lead to better life outcomes. Now, your giving statement, your giving mission statement might be just like this. It might be a little different. It might be simpler. It might be more complex. We just want to give you a framework and the tools to start to put this together. And as you think about it over time, you know, it might get a little bit more robust. You might also want to ask your friends, your family, your coworkers. There might be other people you give with, and you might want to do this work together as well. So if you've got some of your mission statements drafted, we'd love for you to share those out as well into the Q&A box. So here's one. My giving is motivated by knowledge and opportunity. It is focused on education and targeted for children from my home country, India, so that all children from my native land can get the educational opportunities similar to what people like me here did. So that's a great one. They're all great. I mean, and these are also, you know, they evolve over time, so don't be shy to share them out. Someone is focused on arts, high school, and university programs. If anyone else has a mission statement, please feel free to share. And if not, we'll go on to the next section of this work. Okay. Well, great. Keep working on those. And we're going to go into the work around starting to think about your philanthropic budget next. And Elizabeth, I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks. So love that. I love a good Mad Lib. And now that we've Mad Libbed our way through that mission statement, we're going to talk a little bit more about budget and how much you might give. In our next slide here, we should have another poll because it's time for, we all love a good poll. So again, I'll read it out for you here. So typically, are you setting an annual giving budget for yourself? And if you could, we're going to go ahead and launch that so you can respond yes, no, or sometimes. Give people a little bit longer to respond to that poll. Great. So if we could close that out and see how everyone responded. Oh, wow, great mix. So the majority of you, half of you do set a giving budget annually, and then a little bit of mix of the no and the sometimes. That's awesome. Okay, we can go ahead and close that out. Perfect. So like Jen mentioned earlier, you have a lot of resources to give. So we'll go ahead and start with that financial budget that you can set. In terms of timing considerations, you can consider what you want to give over maybe a short term, like even just the next year, but also think toward the future and how much you may want to give over the next maybe 10 years. Think about how often you might plan to give. A lot of people might set up monthly donations. They could do quarterly donations. And then we also know a lot of individuals get together one time of year, maybe over the holidays, and do their giving then. I know we worked with a family before that found that it was a great exercise to come together as a family and talk about it over Thanksgiving when they got together and just share ideas and thoughts. And then the idea was that they could come back together at Christmas and actually finalize their giving. You can also think about the type of gifts you want to make. So think back to that mission statement, and I saw that a few more were rolling in, so that's awesome. But think back to those and think about how you might want to allocate that budget that you set across those different cause areas, and even geographically, if you're supporting local, national, worldwide, kind of like Jen talked about earlier. This is that GPS situation. So if you have your mission, this might be where you think about setting aside part of that budget for those unexpected causes, for the gas station along the way, or that site that's been calling your name for the last 100 miles. And then also want to call out the opportunity to maybe think about a stretch gift every so often. So that's a gift that might be beyond your usual giving. It could be a $1,000 gift for you, might be a $100,000 gift. For some, it could even be $1 million. And I have a feeling if you might be thinking, so what number is it? And maybe even thinking like, how much should I be giving overall? How do I even come up with the overall budget number? And unfortunately, we don't have a silver bullet for you here or even a magic calculator. But what we will say is similar to that mission statement, it's likely to change and evolve over time and should be revisited frequently. It will very much change even during your phases of life. Now, again, we don't have that silver bullet, but we do have a little charitable hack for you today that we wanted to call out. If you're really looking for ways to maximize that budget and your impact, maybe see if your employer offers something like a matching gift, or check with your the organizations that you support and see if they provide a matching opportunity. Giving Tuesday is a pretty common one, and you might see that that $100 that you had to give could end up making a $300 impact, which is really great. So again, thinking beyond even that financial budget that you have, think of all your other resources, your time that you can give in volunteering. Over the last few years, we definitely saw a lot of organizations get creative and offer various virtual volunteering opportunities. And I think what we saw there was an increase in things like skills-based volunteering. So, you know, maybe not something that's just manual help or, you know, physical help, but also using maybe the skills that you use at work and lending that to a nonprofit, things like that. And then, as we mentioned earlier, you can also think about ways that you can leverage your network to help as well. So now that we have our mission and our budget, I'm going to go ahead and hand it back over to Maeve to talk about how to support the organizations and how to choose them.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. So yes, in this section, as Elizabeth mentioned, we are going to talk about how to identify nonprofit organizations operating in those cause areas you care about most, how you can vet them, and then how you may think about structuring the grants that you're considering making. So we'll move on to the next slide. So in the prior slides, we talked about identifying those issue areas, and I know many of you have many issues that you're so passionate about. You care about so many things, right? And so one of the exercises that we walk through with our clients is kind of narrowing the scope, understanding the problems, and then really determining like where and how you can make the greatest impact. So we know that many of these issue areas are very complex, and what we do is kind of break it down a little further. So let's take the example of homelessness. So this is a very complicated issue with many underlying and contributing factors. Some of those kind of underlying specific challenges may include things like access to affordable housing or lack of affordable housing inventory. Could include access to quality mental health care services or substance abuse support services, economic instability and job training programs, or policies at the local, state, or federal level. So by digging in a little bit more, researching those issues and cause areas, you can perhaps kind of narrow in on the scope of what resonates most with you. So perhaps you've determined, you know, this connection between mental health care access and quality mental health care services and homelessness is really important to me. Or perhaps you maybe are thinking, I'm more interested in investing in research that helps us better understand this challenge and what interventions are most effective where. So you can really kind of narrow the scope that way. And you can also then apply kind of a lens of geographic scope as we talked about in our prior slides. So are you interested in addressing this issue in your hometown where you live now? Or maybe you recently visited somewhere that had a pretty profound effect on you and you'd like to be part of the solution in addressing homelessness in that community. So these are ways that we typically work together to kind of narrow the scope of the challenge, make it seem a little bit more manageable to then identify those nonprofit organizations, institutions that are really doing incredible work to address that challenge. So we'll move on to the next slide. So as a consultant, these are two of the most commonly asked questions that I get. So how do I find nonprofits and how do I vet them? And to me, this makes perfect sense because we have, I think, over 1.8 million nonprofits in the United States. the options can seem limitless. It can seem overwhelming of where to start, how do I find these organizations? And then, of course, as a philanthropist, you want to ensure that your philanthropic dollars are being put to good use. So is this organization going to be a good steward of my grant? And so that's what we will be talking about in this next section. So we move on to the next slide. So we are going to ask you another poll. As Elizabeth, you love a good poll. So a question for you here. If you are researching a nonprofit organization and you're kind of starting out learning more about particular organizations in an area, which of these tools and resources do you use? So we have third-party kind of research websites like a Charity Navigator or a GuideStar. We can connect with someone that is affiliated with the organization, whether that's a board member or a staff person, or maybe you're looking into publicly available information that the organization publishes, whether that be their financials or their annual report. And before we launch the poll, I did just want to shine a light on these two resources we have highlighted here. So Charity Navigator and Candid, used to be called GuideStar. These are free resources that are available to you. They provide information on nonprofit organizations in different capacities. So Charity Navigator has a database of, I think, about 200,000 organizations in the US that they have conducted kind of an independent evaluation of, with a criteria set that includes like the degree of transparency of the organization and some financial health indicators. And then on Candid, the Candid front, they pull in tax filing data from the IRS, from the nonprofit organizations to present a really nice picture of the nonprofit's financials. And the nonprofit can also layer on kind of supplemental information about their impact. So when you log into your Fidelity Charitable Donor Advised Fund, you can you'll go into grants, you'll see an organization, you can click research charity. That would bring you to the organization's Candid profile. So before we launch the poll, I just wanted to make sure you knew that those were resources that were available to you if you wish to use them in the future. So let's go ahead and launch the poll and hear from you. Which of these tools do you find most valuable? Could be using all of them, so select all that apply, or maybe you're using some of them for some situations or others for different situations. So go ahead and let us know which of these you are utilizing. Okay, maybe we can go ahead and close the poll, share out. Great, looks like a wonderful combination. So folks are utilizing Candid, Charity Navigator, that's great. If you're not already familiar with those resources, do check them out. The nonprofit website and annual reports, so valuable. And then of course, those personal connections, right? Validation and experience from family, friends, or peers. So wonderful, we can take down that poll. Okay, so in this section, we're going to talk about how we evaluate nonprofit organizations. And we have a number of criteria that we can walk through today, but I do just kind of want to provide some context and awareness that the degree of research you will conduct and the rigor of your evaluation is likely going to be proportionate to a couple of factors. So one being, the size of the donation that you're thinking of making, as well as your familiarity with the organization. So for instance, if my daughter's preschool contacts me and says, we're doing a fundraiser, we'd like some support to refurbish the playground, I don't feel a need to go through this whole list. I feel I've already vetted them and I'm comfortable with them, and that's a good use of money, in my opinion. So sounds good, let's move forward. However, if I am working on behalf of a client that is, considering a large gift to a different organization, I will likely utilize all of the tools and resources that are appropriate and at my disposal. So we're going to walk through today some of these components. So we have a couple of buckets. So people, programs, and financial health. So on the people front, what we're thinking about is learning more about the staff and the leadership composition of the organization. And we're looking into their skills and experience, and want to understand kind of the diversity of this group in a number of dimensions. So first, we're looking into the skills and professional backgrounds of the board and the staff. So you'll often hear or observe that nonprofit boards will have an attorney, they'll have a CPA on the board, someone with marketing expertise. And these are all really important skills that can kind of round out the organization and help them achieve sustained success. Can also look into diversity from the racial, ethnic perspective, as well as gender perspective. And then another thing that we also think about is whether or not the staff and or board or leaders reflect the community that's being served, right? So kind of going back to that example of homelessness, oftentimes organizations that are addressing homelessness or serving an unhoused population, they will have people with lived experience with homelessness working with them in some capacity, whether that be on the board, maybe they have an advisory council or on staff. And those folks are really in a great position to inform the programming, make sure it's relevant, and that they can provide their input based upon their lived experience. So that's a very kind of valuable aspect to think about. So next we have the programs and impact. And of course, you'll want to understand the mission of the organizations that you're giving to, right? And we have a number of questions up here. And I would say that these are geared more toward, a medium, larger size organization. So if you're thinking about giving maybe to a smaller organization that's volunteer led and run, they're likely not going to have a very robust strategic plan and, a big data dashboard, and that's okay, that's appropriate. So, I just wanted to call that out. Like if they don't have answers to all of these questions, that may be okay. But for those, medium and larger organizations, want to understand their mission, of course, and then we also want to understand the strategies that they're employing to achieve that mission and how those programs align with the strategies. Over time, how are they getting feedback from the people that they're serving? How are they then adapting the programs moving forward? Do they have clearly articulated goals for their impact? Maybe how are they measuring their impact? So these are questions that you can perhaps answer by checking out their website, by their annual report. But if you have questions about the organization, you're just interested in learning more, you can always call them and you can say, I'd like to speak with someone in the fundraising team or development team. I'd like to learn more about your programs. You can also ask, what's your biggest fundraising priority at this time? And I'm sure that they would be delighted to share that with you and share more about the great work that they're doing. And I just wanted to address a question that had come in, I think today, prior to this conversation, around kind of striking that balance, a small organization versus a large organization, how do I make that choice? And oftentimes we're working with folks, they have kind of a blended approach. So, you don't necessarily only have to focus on large or small organizations. You can say in some circumstances, perhaps if I'm focusing locally, I'm going to, look into smaller organizations, and national and global, I'm more comfortable with, a very long-standing large organization. So, there's not a silver bullet to Elizabeth's point, but it's okay to have a blended portfolio, if you will, within your philanthropy. So we can move on to the next slide. This slide focuses on financial health, and so financial health is a really important thing to look at and to learn more about, because it can give you a clear line of sight into the operations and sustainability of a nonprofit organization. And one thing to note is that the finances of different organizations may look very different, right? So it's not always going to be apples to apples. If you think about it, if you're looking into a university, they own probably a ton of, they have a lot of assets, properties, they have a robust fundraising group, they have different types of expenses as compared to maybe a small startup tutoring organization in your community. So when you are looking for a point of comparison when looking into financial health, you may want to focus in on kind of similarly situated or size organization that's doing similar work. So that will be a really kind of helpful grounding point for you. So then in terms of some of the things that we would be looking into when we're assessing financial health, revenue is a great indicator for a number of reasons. So one is we're looking into the diversity of the revenue sources. So we want to ensure from a sustainability perspective that the organization has revenue coming in from different types of funders, that they have a robust kind of a suite of supporters, so that they're more likely to sustain into the future. Revenue can also be super helpful. To Elizabeth's point around like determining the size of your gift, there's no silver bullet, right? But when you get a sense of the annual revenue of the organization, or if they publish what we kind of refer to as like a donor roll, they'll say, $2,500, this person, this person, this person. That can give you a sense of how the gift that you're contemplating, how that will stack up. So is this going to be a transformational kind of game-changing donation, or is this going to be relatively smaller but still essential to helping the organization carry out its operations and programming? So that's something to consider. And then you can also look into kind of their trends over time. So has the organization consistently experienced a deficit? Have they been growing so rapidly, so much interest, attracting new donors, really great success there? That can be helpful for you to kind of understand where they're at. And you may need some additional context, right? So for instance, I shared the example, if they've had a deficit, let's say the past 2 years, that could have, that could be directly related to implications from COVID, let's say, or perhaps their board and leaders decided to make a strategic investment that was kind of front loading an investment to help their programs expand into a new community. So with looking at the finances of an organization, I would say it's kind of a snapshot and it may require context. So again, if you feel that you want to contact the organization and learn more, you can definitely do that. I would frequently do that if I'm really digging in on those audited financials, or I have a specific question I'm just kind of not understanding. Feel free to contact them and ask. So we can move on to the next slide. So here we have a set of the kind of components that we talked about today, across programs, people, finances, and there's really no one size fits all, set of criteria. You may feel that you're going to utilize all of these or none of these, depending upon the gift, or perhaps you have your own. But we wanted to offer this up to you as something to keep in mind moving forward, kind of all the tools at your disposal. So we'll go on to the next slide. So in this section, kind of moving toward the expenses component of an organization's budget. So which of these costs do you think can help an organization achieve impact? So we have expenses related to salaries and infrastructure, maybe all of these or none of these. So let's go ahead and launch that poll. Technology upgrade. Campaigns to raise awareness, that's a marketing expense, of course. Maybe all of these. Okay, I think we can probably go ahead and close out the poll. Okay, interesting. 60% said all of these. A lot of emphasis around marketing, tech upgrades, and executive director salary. Okay, wonderful. So this is, I think, an interesting question because and we can probably close out the poll. In the past, you may have kind of heard a guideline around, nonprofits should really only invest 10 to 15% of their budget in administrative costs. And I would say that this parameter this hard and fast rule has kind of fallen out of practice in our field in recent years. In particular, there's definitely been more of a movement around this emphasis on what we call trust-based philanthropy, which is really kind of, signaling to nonprofit organizations that we understand that these are really important expenses for you to carry out your work. We know that you need to hire qualified people and retain them, and your infrastructure is essential to your operations. So there's definitely been more of a movement in recent years to provide general operating support and kind of empower the organization and the leaders to just be great stewards of grant dollars. So if you log into your Fidelity Charitable account, you can check the option of where it's needed most, and that's basically the same as this general operating support. So there are many costs that nonprofit organizations incur to, keep the lights on, keep things running, and technology is a great example, right? And we all had to kind of adapt to this Zoom world we're in right now. There were, of course, expenses that, came with that too. So that's one consideration that you can take moving forward. And we'll move on to the next slide. So these are some other options that are available to you when you're making a grant, and there are other options out there as well, but just wanted to highlight a few. Maybe you can consider prior to kind of going into your account and entering a grant recommendation. One thing to think about is the duration. So are you contemplating a one-time grant recommendation, or will this be recurring? Nonprofit organizations, I'm sure, would be thrilled if you let them know that you're interested in a recurring grant recommendation. I know we also received a question prior to today's session about, I feel like my philanthropy is kind of taking a lot of time. By setting up recurring grant recommendations, that's a great way to kind of set and forget your giving for a little while if you have less time to dedicate to this. So that's an option. Designation is another component, which is, whether or not this grant recommendation will be for a specific program or a campaign, or perhaps you as a donor want to establish, let's say, a matching campaign or something like that. Or maybe you're going to go the general operating route, which is totally fine too. So then finally, we have acknowledgement. So earlier we talked about if your giving is private or if it will be more kind of hands-on or collaborative. So think about whether or not you want your grant recommendation to be anonymous. And then also, what are your communications expectations from the organization? Do you hope to hear from them with status updates if this is a large grant, or would you like to be signed up for their newsletter, that sort of thing? I would say, if you have expectations, try to communicate that to them early on the front end so that they can meet them, and also, that they're kind of right-sized to the gift that you're contemplating. So with that, I will turn it over to Jen.
Thanks, and I think, Maeve, those are some great comments leading into this section, which is how are you going to define success for your philanthropy, and how do you know what impact your dollars are having? And the first part of that question, how will you define success? I think that part of your mission statement that articulates your vision and outcomes helps you do that. That's really at the end of the day what you're trying to achieve. But with your donations, you can also, there are a lot of ways to think about what impact that's having. And if we could go on to the next slide, I think the key to this is what Maeve alluded to. We just want to make sure that your expectations are right-sized for not only the gift that you're providing, but also for the size and maturity of an organization. So there are a few ways, I would say maybe, evaluation light that you can get to see what impact your dollars are having. And again, we keep coming back to an organization's annual reports. Those are really valuable tools for understanding what they're achieving year over year. And kind of, it's also really nice when you have the ability to look at several years of reports and you can kind of see progress over time. So we highly recommend that. Another idea is milestone-based funding. So what that might look like for you is a gift that you want to make over several years, but you only release the next, sort of tranche of funding after a particular milestone has been hit. So whether that's another fundraising milestone or a programmatic milestone, whatever that might be, but that way you're sort of giving as you see the organization making the progress that you expect. The other thing you can do, and this is one we very strongly encouraged, or encourage rather, is have a conversation with the organizations, especially the ones that you're really passionate about supporting. Development teams, fundraising teams are very, very happy to speak with donors, especially if they're donors who are anticipating being involved for the long term. And it gives you the opportunity to not just hear about what's going well or just, not just get the data, but also to build a rapport with the organization. So when they face challenges, they can also share those with you. And certainly during COVID, we saw so many organizations that had challenges they never could have anticipated, and they were able to go to those funders that they knew well and say, hey, this is cropped up and we really need help with this. So having that relationship is really important. Of course, you can also request a report. As Maeve said, we strongly suggest you make that really clear from the outset. But always keep in mind that you don't want any reporting requirements to be too burdensome on the organization. Anytime they're spending writing reports or collecting data or analyzing data is time they're not spending delivering programs and services to their constituents. That's not saying a report isn't sometimes appropriate, certainly it is, but again, make sure that's right-sized for your gift and the size of the organization. And then the other two ideas here on the slide are ones that I think are really interesting to some donors. If you are really interested in data and really sophisticated reporting, it's a great opportunity for you to fund that kind of thing for the organization. As you might imagine, certain initiatives are much easier to gather data from than others. For instance, if you're funding a research lab, they probably specialize in collecting and reporting out on data, so that might not be so hard for them. But say you're funding a public health initiative where they're going door to door trying to get people to get preventative wellness services, and you want to see what was the effect of that campaign. That's a little harder to measure, and that's something an organization might need help with. So you can consider working with the organization to help set up a way to evaluate programs. And likewise, you might even consider funding a feasibility study. What that might look like, we recently worked with a client who was very interested in supporting the addition of more bicycle lanes in her community. As you might imagine, that's a rather involved process. You're working with local government, sometimes state and national grants. The organization she was working with really had no idea how much it would cost, how much time it would take, who their key stakeholders would be. So they suggested that she instead fund a feasibility study to see if the project was even viable. Now, back to one of our earlier points about what is your approach and your comfort with risk, that's kind of a risky thing. She ended up funding a feasibility study, and at the end, that feasibility study might say, this is not a project that's viable, so we can't use your money in that way, and the money she spent on the study would be, maybe to some people considered lost. But she was, pretty well versed in this and said, I want to make sure that if I do give a big gift down the road, it's used for maximum impact. So the feasibility study is really important. So those are just some ideas of ways you can think about measuring the impact your dollars have. Again, some are far more sophisticated than any of you might ever want to be, but you do have options as you go down that road. So I'm gonna kind of stop there for a moment and switch gears a bit, if we could go to the next slide. And we'd like you to just take a moment. I know we've had a lot of information that we've shared today, and you've done a lot of work and you've been so wonderfully engaged, and we appreciate that. What we'd like for you to think of now is one thing that you can do in the next month based on the conversations we've had today that will help you make progress on your giving plan. And how will you hold yourself accountable? And that might be something as easy as doing a volunteer activity with your children, or researching board service opportunities, or setting up a recurring grant in your donor advised fund account, as Maeve mentioned. But if you could think about that and share that out in the question and answer, that would be great. When we do these kinds of sessions in person, we know at the end of our sessions, we have folks stand up and say out loud what their commitment is. And that really gets people motivated and compelled to stick to their plan. So we'll do that in the virtual forum by putting it here in the Q&A. So if you could share that with us, that would be great. Okay, great. So we have someone who is going to set up recurring grants. my husband and I will review our giving mission statement together. That's a wonderful idea. You can do that with your broader family. Looking into charities more carefully. You know, we've shared so many resources that are available to you. A very specific mission statement, love it, that's great. Find a local organization addressing homelessness. A budget, yes, we love our budgets around here. Research charities, great. Well, please keep them coming in. We love to see these, and we get a transcript of everything that comes in, so it's always nice for us to go back and look at this as well. I'm going to hand it back over to Maeve now for a minute, and thank you so much.
Great. Next slide, Judy. Thank you. So at the top of the workshop, I mentioned the philanthropic consulting program. Just wanted to share a little bit more about that program with you. So this is a program through which Fidelity Charitable donors can receive additional support from our team, really related to grant making activity through their grants. So I think today's workshop was very kind of representative of the type of work we do with individuals and families, whether that's helping them identify those nonprofit organizations. Maybe we have a family meeting, talk about clarifying our mission statement or developing that budget, how the family might want to get involved. So I just wanted to let you know we are here as a resource to you. And if you're interested in learning more, we have that email there, philconsulting@fmr.com. Please feel free to send us an email. Happy to discuss your interests with you further. And then also, if you have questions that were coming into your mind during the session, we didn't answer them, you can shoot them to that email as well, and we will get back to you. I know that there was a question that had come in actually just quickly around kind of protecting anonymity while doing research and connecting with the organization. I will say from my prior experience in working in fundraising at a nonprofit, it's completely typical for someone to say, you know, I'm not ready to share who I am yet, but I wanted to learn more. And, you know, that I don't think that a nonprofit organization would be put off by that. So you can, if you want to call, you can protect your anonymity in that way. So if you're interested in continuing the conversation, maybe taking it a step deeper, we are here for you and happy to help. So just want to thank you all for your time today and for your participation. We'd love to see it all coming through on the chat. So wish you all a great rest of your day.
And I love seeing all these commitments coming in, so inspiring.
Amazing.
Absolutely. And also, I think there's been a few questions about this. We will be sending out a recording later. So if you want to revisit this again, or if maybe somebody didn't get to attend and you want to watch together, you can certainly do that.
Great.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Wonderful.